Thunder rolled across Manhattan's steel-gray sky, a fitting backdrop for another hectic morning on Wall Street. James Mitchell sat behind the wheel of his Bentley, watching raindrops race down his windshield. His mind was focused on the upcoming board meeting at JFK's private terminal. Another merger, another billion-dollar deal. Just another day in the life of New York's youngest investment banking CEO. The traffic light turned red at Fifth Avenue, bringing his thoughts to a momentary halt. That's when he saw them through the rain-streaked window. A young woman, barely in her 30s, huddled under a store awning. She held a small child close to her chest, trying to shield the little girl from the relentless downpour. Their clothes were worn but clean, speaking of dignity despite hardship. Something about them caught James's attention. Perhaps it was the way the mother held her child, or the child's innocent eyes meeting his through the car window. The little girl couldn't have been more than 5, her blonde pigtails peeking out from under a pink hood. She smiled at him, a pure, unguarded expression that seemed out of place in cynical Manhattan. The mother noticed his gaze and quickly looked away, pulling her daughter closer. James recognized that look, pride mixed with desperation, trying to maintain dignity in the face of adversity. The light turned green, but James didn't move. Cars behind him honked impatiently, the symphony of New York's perpetual rush. "To hell with it," he muttered, pulling over to the curb. He lowered his passenger window, ignoring the rain that sprayed into his $5,000 suit. "You shouldn't be out in this weather," he called out, surprising himself with the concern in his voice. The woman hesitated, instinctively protecting her daughter from a stranger's attention. "I can give you a ride somewhere," James offered, then added quickly, "no strings attached." The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm cold." Those 3 words seemed to break through the mother's resistance. She looked at James again, this time really seeing him. His expensive car, his corporate attire, his surprisingly kind eyes. "I'm Emma," she said finally, her voice carrying traces of refined education. "And this is Sophie." "James Mitchell," he replied, opening the rear door. "Please, get in before you both catch pneumonia." Emma hesitated for one more moment before the rain made her decision for her. They slipped into the warm leather interior, Sophie's eyes widening at the luxury surrounding them. "Thank you," Emma said softly, helping Sophie with the seatbelt. James caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Where can I take you?" Emma's pause told him more than words could have. We were just trying to get to the shelter on 23rd, she finally admitted, her cheeks flushing. Sophie was already falling asleep, the car's warmth and gentle motion lulling her into security. James glanced at his watch. His flight to Chicago was in 2 hours. The board meeting was crucial for the merger he'd spent months orchestrating. But something about this moment felt more important than any corporate deal. "I have a better idea," he heard himself say. "I have a house on the Upper East Side. It's empty most of the time anyway." Emma's body tensed. "Mr. Mitchell, I couldn't possibly." "Please," James interrupted. "Call me James." "And yes, you could. At least until the storm passes." Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about being hungry. That simple sound seemed to crack Emma's resolve. Just until the storm passes," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. James turned the car toward East 75th Street, knowing his decision would raise eyebrows in his social circle. But watching Sophie sleep peacefully in his back seat, seeing Emma's relief mixed with cautious gratitude, he couldn't bring himself to care about society's judgment. Sometimes, he realized, the most important board meetings happen on rainy streets, not in corporate boardrooms. His phone buzzed, probably his secretary wondering where he was. The Chicago meeting would have to wait. For the first time in years, James Mitchell, the king of Wall Street, was following his heart instead of his calendar. And somehow, as rain continued to pour outside, it felt exactly right. The iron gates of James's townhouse swung open silently, welcoming them into a world Emma had only seen in magazines. The 4-story brownstone stood proudly against the rain, its classic facade a testament to old New York money. Sophie's eyes grew wide as they stepped into the marble foyer, her small hand gripping her mother's tightly. "It's like a castle, Mommy," she whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. James couldn't help but smile at her innocent wonder. "The kitchen is fully stocked," he said, leading them through the house. Please make yourselves at home." Emma stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances and pristine countertops. "When was the last time you both ate?" James asked gently, noting Emma's hesitation. Sophie answered before her mother could stop her. "Yesterday morning." Emma's face flushed with embarrassment, but James was already moving to the refrigerator. "I have to leave for a business trip," he said, pulling out eggs, bread, and fresh vegetables. "But I want you both to stay here, at least until I return tomorrow evening." Emma started to protest, but James held up his hand. "Please, Emma." For Sophie, those 3 words struck directly at Emma's heart. She looked at her daughter, who was already exploring the kitchen with curious eyes. "The security system is automated," James continued, placing his business card on the counter. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, comes on Thursdays. She's completely trustworthy." He pulled out a credit card and set it next to his business card. "For anything you need," he said simply. Emma shook her head. "I can't accept." "You can, and you will," James interrupted firmly. For Sophie. Sophie had discovered the window seat in the breakfast nook, pressing her face against the glass to watch the rain. "Mommy, look, we can see the whole street from here." Emma's resolve wavered as she watched her daughter's excitement. James checked his watch again. "I really have to go now." He pulled out a set of keys from his pocket, placing them next to the cards. "The alarm code is 1234. Please, make yourselves comfortable." Emma stood straighter, summoning her dignity. "Why are you doing this?" James paused at the kitchen doorway, considering her question. "Because sometimes life gives us a chance to do something right," he answered quietly. "And I've learned not to ignore those moments." After James left, Emma stood in the silent kitchen, trying to process the surreal turn of events. Sophie's stomach growled audibly, breaking the spell. "Are you hungry, sweetie?" Emma asked, moving to the refrigerator. For the first time in months, she could offer her daughter a proper meal. The kitchen was better equipped than the restaurants where she'd once waited tables. Emma found herself falling into a familiar rhythm, chopping vegetables for an omelet. Sophie watched from her perch on a bar stool, swinging her legs contentedly. "Mommy, can we stay here forever?" she asked innocently. Emma's hands paused over the cutting board. "Just for tonight, baby. Mr. Mitchell is being very kind, but we can't impose." Yet as she cooked in the warm kitchen, listening to Sophie chat about the castle, Emma felt a dangerous sense of belonging. The simple act of preparing food in a real kitchen brought tears to her eyes. She quickly wiped them away before Sophie could notice. The omelet turned out perfectly, cheese melting over fresh vegetables. Sophie ate as if it were a feast at a 5-star restaurant. "This is the best dinner ever, Mommy." Emma managed to smile, remembering similar meals in their old apartment, before everything fell apart. After dinner, they explored the house together, feeling like tourists in a museum. The living room housed leather sofas and original artwork. A grand piano sat in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier above. The second floor revealed a library that made Emma's heart ache with longing. Medical textbooks lined one wall. James's mother had been a surgeon, they would later learn. Sophie discovered a children's section, complete with a cozy reading nook. "Can you read me a story, Mommy?" "Please." Emma settled into the plush armchair, Sophie curled in her lap. The familiar words of "Goodnight, Moon" had never felt so precious. As night fell, they found the guest rooms on the 3rd floor. Sophie chose a room with pink wallpaper and a canopy bed. "Just like a princess," she declared, bouncing on the mattress. Emma helped her daughter bathe in the marble bathroom, using the luxurious soaps and shampoos. Clean pajamas were found in a dresser, slightly big but wonderfully soft. Sophie fell asleep almost instantly, her damp hair spread across the silken pillowcase. Emma stood watching her daughter sleep, emotions warring in her chest. Pride urged her to leave now, to not accept charity from a stranger. But love, fierce, maternal love, demanded she give Sophie this one night of comfort. In her own room, Emma finally allowed herself to cry. Silent tears for all they'd lost, for the kindness of a stranger, for the warmth of a real home. The bed embraced her like a cloud, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind raced with questions about James Mitchell. What made a wealthy CEO stop for a homeless mother and child? Why trust them with his home, his credit card, his possessions? Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the grime of city streets. Inside, in a mansion on the Upper East Side, a mother and daughter slept soundly for the first time in months. And somewhere over the Midwest, James Mitchell found himself thinking more about them than his business deal. Life, he realized, had a way of rearranging priorities when you least expected it. Olivia Stanford's Louboutins clicked sharply against the marble floor of James's foyer. She hadn't announced her visit, but then again, she never did. As James's fiancée and a Stanford banking heiress, she considered the townhouse practically hers. The sound of laughter, a child's laughter, stopped her mid-stride. "Sophie, careful with the bubbles." A woman's voice echoed from the kitchen. Olivia's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her Hermes bag. She followed the sound, her social smile fixed firmly in place. The scene in the kitchen left her momentarily speechless. A young woman stood at the sink, helping a small girl wash dishes. Both were covered in soap suds, giggling as they worked. Neither belonged in James Mitchell's kitchen. "Excuse me." Olivia's voice cut through their laughter like ice. Emma spun around, immediately sensing the hostility behind Olivia's polite smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't hear you come in," Emma said, quickly wiping her hands. Sophie hid behind her mother, suddenly shy. "Clearly," Olivia replied, her gaze sweeping over their casual attire with disdain. "And you are?" Before Emma could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "Miss Stanford, we weren't expecting you today." The housekeeper's eyes darted between the women, sensing the tension. "Obviously not," Olivia said coolly. "Would someone care to explain?" Emma straightened her spine, years of Harvard poise returning. "I'm Emma Carter. Mr. Mitchell offered us shelter from the storm yesterday." Olivia's laugh was like crystal breaking. "How charitable of him. And you just accepted?" Sophie clutched her mother's leg, feeling the atmosphere change. Mrs. Rodriguez busied herself with unnecessary cleaning, providing silent support. "We'll be leaving soon," Emma said quietly, dignity intact. "Oh, don't rush on my account." Olivia's smile didn't reach her eyes. She pulled out her phone, perfectly French-tipped nails tapping the screen. Within minutes, she had Emma's history displayed before her. "Harvard Medical School dropout," she read aloud. "How fascinating." Emma's face paled, but she stood her ground. "My past is none of your business, Miss Stanford." Olivia ignored her, continuing to scroll. "No current employment, no permanent address." She looked up, triumph in her eyes. Did James know he was inviting a homeless woman into his home? Sophie whimpered at the cruel tone, making Emma's heart clench. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go pack our things." But Olivia wasn't finished. "I'll have to discuss security measures with James. Anyone could claim hardship these days." Mrs. Rodriguez suddenly dropped a pan, the clang interrupting Olivia's subtle accusations. "So sorry, Miss Stanford," the housekeeper muttered, but her eyes were kind when they met Emma's. Upstairs, Emma packed their few belongings with trembling hands. Sophie sat on the bed, clutching the book they'd read last night. "Mommy, why was that lady so mean?" Emma forced a smile. "Sometimes people don't understand, sweetheart." In the foyer, Olivia was already on the phone with her private investigator. "I want everything you can find on Emma Carter. Every detail." She paused, watching Emma and Sophie descend the stairs. "No, this isn't over. I need ammunition." Emma headed for the door, head high despite her humiliation. "Miss Carter," Olivia called out sweetly, "do give James my regards." The door closed behind them with a final click. Olivia surveyed the now quiet house with satisfaction. Her phone buzzed. The investigator had already found something interesting. In the kitchen, Mrs. Rodriguez muttered a prayer for Emma and Sophie. She'd seen the genuine warmth they'd brought to the cold mansion, and she'd seen the look in James's eyes when he'd watched them at breakfast. Outside, Emma and Sophie walked toward the subway, their brief taste of comfort already fading. But Olivia wasn't done yet. She had a dinner party that evening, the perfect venue to plant seeds of doubt. By the time James returned, the Upper East Side would be buzzing with rumors, and Emma Carter's reputation would be in shreds. Sometimes, Olivia mused, removing threats required a delicate touch. She smiled, already composing the perfect mix of concern and insinuation. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she was about to create. The Harvard Medical School library stood majestic in Emma's memories. Now, as she sat in a modest diner with Sophie, those days felt like another lifetime. "Would you like more hot chocolate, sweetie?" The waitress smiled at Sophie. Their breakfast was, courtesy of tips left in the jar, a kindness Emma wouldn't forget. The morning newspaper lay open on the table, James Mitchell's face on the business page. "Mitchell Enterprises CEO closes historic merger," the headline proclaimed. Emma quickly turned the page, avoiding his piercing gaze even in print. Sophie was drawing on a paper napkin, humming softly to herself. The diner's warmth couldn't quite chase away the chill of Olivia's words. "Mommy, look, I drew our castle." Emma's heart clenched at Sophie's sketch of James's townhouse. The memories of that brief stay still felt surreal. A customer's phone buzzed nearby, the news alert catching Emma's attention. Mitchell Stanford engagement gala announced. The words hit harder than they should have. Emma's mind drifted back to her own past, before everything crumbled. She had been top of her class at Harvard Medical School. Professors praised her research potential, her steady hands in anatomy lab. Her parents had been so proud. Their daughter, the future doctor. Then came the accident on I-95, a rainy night much like when she met James. The police officer's words still echoed. There were no survivors. Emma's world had collapsed in that hospital waiting room. The insurance barely covered the funeral expenses. Her education fund, carefully built by her parents, vanished into estate taxes. That's when William entered her life, like a knight in designer armor. He was a visiting professor, charming and seemingly successful. "I'll help you through this," he had promised, eyes full of false sincerity. Emma fell for his act completely, desperate for support. William convinced her to invest her remaining savings in his guaranteed venture. By the time she discovered the truth, he had vanished with everything. The pregnancy test came back positive a week later. Sophie kicked under the diner table, bringing Emma back to present. "Can we go to the park, Mommy?" Emma checked their remaining cash, just enough for subway fare. The city parks were their sanctuary now, free entertainment for endless days. "Sure, baby. Central Park sounds perfect." As they walked to the subway, Emma's thoughts returned to James. His kindness had been real, untainted by ulterior motives. But Olivia's arrival had shattered that brief peace. Sophie skipped ahead, still humming, resilient as only children can be. A newspaper stand displayed more photos of James and Olivia. Power couple set to unite Wall Street dynasties. Emma hurried past, pulling Sophie along gently. The past couldn't be changed, she reminded herself. Harvard, her parents, William, all belonged to another life. Sophie was her future now, the only dream worth protecting. Yet something about James Mitchell haunted her thoughts. His genuine concern, so different from William's practiced charm. The way he looked at Sophie, with unguarded kindness. But he belonged to Olivia's world now, if he ever didn't. And Emma had learned the hard way about trusting fairy tales. At the park entrance, Sophie's excitement pushed away darker thoughts. "Look, Mommy, the flowers are blooming." Spring in New York brought renewal, even to the weariest souls. Emma watched her daughter chase butterflies, gratitude overwhelming her. They might not have much, but they had each other. And sometimes, that had to be enough. James Mitchell stared at the investigator's report on his mahogany desk. The Chicago merger was complete, but his mind was elsewhere. Emma Carter's life story lay before him in stark black and white. His private investigator had been thorough, almost painfully so. Harvard Medical School, class of 2019, he read aloud. Full scholarship, top 5% of her class. Photos showed a younger Emma in a white coat, smile bright with promise. News clippings detailed her parents' tragic accident on I-95. The estate complications that followed, draining her resources. Then came William Anderson, the visiting professor with a dark past. Multiple fraud charges across 3 states, all after Emma's savings disappeared. James's fist clenched as he read the police reports. William had taken everything, leaving Emma alone and pregnant. The prestigious medical career derailed by circumstances beyond her control. His phone buzzed, Another message from Olivia. She'd been busy during his absence, he'd heard. The Upper East Side gossip mill was churning with rumors about Emma. Gold digger, some whispered. Con artist, others suggested. Olivia's handiwork was evident in every poisonous word. James opened his laptop, pulling up security footage from his townhouse. Emma and Sophie in the kitchen, making breakfast with Mrs. Rodriguez. Sophie reading in the library, Emma watching with pure love. No signs of theft, no suspicious behavior. Just a mother trying to protect her daughter. His office door opened. Olivia swept in, impeccably dressed. Darling, we need to discuss your house guests. Her voice dripped with carefully crafted concern. I've heard disturbing things about this Emma person. James held up the investigator's report. You mean her Harvard scholarship? Her parents' death? Olivia faltered slightly, but recovered quickly. She could be dangerous, James. Think of your reputation. He stood, something hardening in his expression. Like William Anderson was dangerous? Olivia's perfectly painted lips parted in surprise. I know everything, Olivia, including your lunch with him last week. Security photos appeared on his computer screen. Olivia, meeting William at a discreet cafe. Money changing hands, plans being made. You hired him to discredit Emma, James stated flatly. I was protecting us, Olivia countered, mask slipping. Protecting your inheritance, you mean? James turned to the window, Manhattan sprawling below. The engagement gala is canceled, Olivia. You can't be serious. Over some homeless. Enough. His voice cut through her protests. I've seen enough manipulation to last a lifetime. Olivia's composure cracked completely. She'll ruin you, James. She and that brat. Security will show you out, James interrupted coldly. Your things will be sent to your apartment. Olivia stormed out, heels striking the floor like weapons. James returned to the investigator's report. One detail caught his eye, Emma's current location. A women's shelter on East 23rd Street. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat. Some mistakes needed to be corrected immediately, and some truths needed to be spoken face to face. The spring rain had returned, but James didn't notice. His driver knew the address without being told. Sometimes he realized losing everything meant finding what mattered. The women's shelter on East 23rd Street stood like a humble guardian in the rain. James stood outside, his usual corporate confidence wavering. Through the window, he could see Sophie playing with other children. Her laughter carried even through the spring storm. Emma sat nearby, helping a young boy with what appeared to be homework. Even here, her innate compassion shone through. The sight made James's heart constrict with unexpected emotion. He remembered his own mother, a surgeon who always made time for others. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the shelter's doors. The warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold rain outside. Sophie spotted him first, her eyes lighting up with recognition. Uncle James, she called out, running toward him without hesitation. Emma's head snapped up, a mix of emotions crossing her face. Protection, fear, and something else, something deeper. Mr. Mitchell, she said formally, standing to face him. The other shelter residents watched curiously. Emma, he said softly, we need to talk. She nodded, professional mask firmly in place. Sophie, stay with Ms. Linda for a moment, okay? They found a quiet corner near the shelter's small kitchen. Rain tapped against the windows, nature's gentle percussion. I know everything, James began, then winced at his bluntness. About Harvard, your parents, William. Emma's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Come to verify Olivia's investigation? No, James shook his head. To apologize. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. I should have trusted my instincts about you. Emma's composure cracked slightly. Instead, I let doubt creep in. I let others influence me. Sophie's laughter echoed from the other room. We don't need pity, Mr. Mitchell. This isn't pity, Emma. This is truth. He pulled out the investigator's report. You were going to be a doctor. Help people. Emma's eyes filled with unshed tears. That was another life. Dreams don't pay bills. They can, James said quietly. With the right support. Emma started to protest, but he continued. Olivia and I are fiendish. She showed her true colors. I'm sorry, Emma said, surprising them both. Don't be. It was long overdue. A moment of silence stretched between them. Let me help, James finally said. For real this time. Why? Emma's whisper held years of pain. Because you remind me that success means nothing without humanity. Sophie appeared suddenly, sensing the moment's importance. Are we going back to the castle? She asked innocently. James knelt down her level, eyes serious. Only if you and your mom want a princess. Emma watched them, her walls slowly crumbling. The house is too big for just me, James continued. And my mother's medical library is gathering dust. The mention of books made Emma's eyes spark. I can't just, she started. Yes, you can, James interrupted gently. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we can do. Sophie took both their hands in her small ones. Please, Mommy. I miss our castle. The rain outside had softened to a gentle mist. Emma looked at James, really looked at him. She saw not the wealthy CEO, but a man seeking connection. Someone who, like her, understood loss and loneliness. One condition, she said finally. James waited, hope building in his chest. I want to finish medical school, on my own terms. His smile could have lit up the rainy day. Done. Harvard won't know what hit them. Sophie bounced with excitement. Does this mean Uncle James is staying too? The adults shared a look, possibilities unfolding. Sometimes they realized home isn't a place. It's the people who make the rain feel less cold. And the heart's brave enough to try again. The Upper East Side townhouse bloomed with new life as spring turned to summer. Medical textbooks mingled with Sophie's storybooks in the once formal library. Emma's acceptance letter from Harvard Medical School sat framed on the desk. Second chances aren't just dreams, it seemed to whisper. James watched from the doorway as Emma studied late into the night. Her dedication reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her quiet strength. The past months had transformed them all in unexpected ways. Sophie had flourished, her laughter now a constant melody in the house. Mrs. Rodriguez hummed as she cooked, the kitchen always warm with activity. Even James found himself leaving the office earlier these days. Board meetings seemed less crucial than bedtime stories with Sophie. Daddy James, she'd started calling him, the words melting his corporate facade. Tonight, Emma sat surrounded by anatomy texts, her hair loosely tied back. The scene stirred something deep in James's heart. Coffee break, he offered, setting down a steaming mug. Emma looked up, her smile softening the exhaustion in her eyes. Just reviewing cardiovascular systems, she said, stretching. The heart is complicated, James mused, sitting beside her. Not always, Emma replied, her hand finding his. They'd taken things slowly, healing at their own pace. No grand gestures or formal announcements. Just quiet moments building trust day by day. Sophie's drawings now covered the refrigerator door. Pictures of their family, 3 stick figures holding hands. The media had speculated, of course. Wall Street tycoon's mysterious new family, headlines proclaimed. But within these walls, they'd found their own truth. Harvard summer program starts next week, Emma said softly. James squeezed her hand, understanding her nervousness. Sophie and I will visit every weekend, he promised. The corporate jet has to be good for something. Emma laughed, the sound echoing through the library. Who would have thought, she wondered aloud. That rainy day changed everything. James pulled her closer, breathing in her presence. Sometimes the best investments aren't listed on Wall Street. Upstairs, Sophie slept peacefully in her princess bed. Her world now secure in ways Emma had only dreamed of. But it wasn't about the mansion or the privileges. It was about the love that had healed 3 broken hearts. I used to think success meant stock portfolios, James confessed. Now I know it's hearing Sophie's laugh. And watching you follow your dreams, he added. Emma leaned into him, feeling truly home. Outside, Manhattan's lights twinkled like stars. Inside, a family had grown from life's storms. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real, built on understanding, trust, and second chances. I love you, Emma whispered, the words falling naturally. James's heart, so long protected behind corporate walls. I love you both, he answered, finally complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Harvard hospital rotations, board meetings, But tonight in the quiet library, three hearts beat as one. Proof that sometimes the best medicine is love. A year had passed since that rainy Manhattan morning. The Harvard Medical School auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Emma sat among her classmates, her white coat crisp and new. The ceremony marking their first year of medical school felt surreal. In the audience, James held Sophie on his lap, both beaming with pride. "That's my mommy," Sophie whispered to everyone nearby. The dean's speech faded into background noise as Emma's mind wandered. She remembered the cold streets, the desperate nights, the weight of Sophie in her arms as they sought shelter from rain. Now, looking at her daughter's radiant face, Emma felt tears threaten. James caught her eye, his smile holding a world of understanding. He had changed too, softened by love while remaining strong. Wall Street's ruthless CEO now read bedtime stories with different voices, built pillow forts on Sunday afternoons, attended tea parties with Sophie's stuffed animals. Dr. Emma Carter, the dean called, presenting her with an honor award. Top of her class again, just like before, but this time, she had a foundation that wouldn't crumble. Later, in the garden behind their townhouse, friends and family gathered to celebrate. Mrs. Rodriguez had outdone herself with the catering. Sophie ran around in her future doctor coat, a miniature version of Emma's. "Like mother, like daughter," James murmured, wrapping his arms around Emma. "Who would have thought," she whispered back, "that getting caught in the rain was the best thing that ever happened to me," James finished. The evening light painted Manhattan's skyline in gold. Their guests mingled, James's board members chatting with Emma's classmates. Two worlds merged, just like their hearts had. Sophie gathered everyone for a toast, her small voice commanding attention. "To my mommy, who's going to be the best doctor ever. And to Daddy James, who found us in the rain." Laughter and tears mingled as glasses clinked. Emma looked around at their assembled family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger. The choice to love, to trust, to believe. James slipped something into her hand, a small velvet box. "Not now," he whispered, "but soon." Emma's heart swelled with joy and certainty. They had taken their time, building trust brick by brick, healing old wounds, creating new memories. In the garden's quiet corner, they shared a private moment. "Remember when you asked why I stopped that day?" James said softly. Emma nodded, remembering her suspicion of kindness. "I thought I was helping you," he continued, "but you saved me." "We saved each other," Emma corrected gently. Sophie's laughter floated across the garden, a sound of pure joy, of childhood secured, of love unconditional and dreams reborn. The Manhattan rain began again, soft and cleansing. But this time, they welcomed it like an old friend, a reminder that sometimes the darkest storms let us home. The end.